Thank you very much, Alok. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here tonight. I think I've done the riskiest thing possibly in my whole career, and I'm wearing a jacket, so we'll see how it goes. But it's great to be here in London. What a gorgeous day, absolutely beautiful. So thank you very much for coming in. But as Marty says, it's air-conditioned, which is fairly awesome. What I'd like to talk about for the next 45 minutes or so is a summary of the expedition that we led down to Antarctica. Effectively 7 months, almost to the day, I was at this location with Chris Fogwell. Chris is a great friend, colleague, and co-leader of the Australasian Antarctic Expedition, and we're standing aside the wind-battered remains of Mawson's hut at Cape Denison in East Antarctica. Basically, if you imagine a line straight down from Tasmania, left a bit, you'll be there, basically. 67 degrees south, 142 degrees east, and there's a great sense of relief that we've actually finally made it. It was the result of about 2 years' hard work by us and a fantastic team of scientists and volunteer scientists as well. But ultimately, though, it's more than just 2 years. It's actually a century of science and exploration. And what I'd like to talk about over this time is not just what we did and what we found, but also the setting, the inspiration behind it, and actually some of the lessons I think we can learn from this amazing time 100 years ago, where there was this prolific engagement of the public about science, exploration, and engagement about what science actually meant, which I think there's actually some lessons there for the future. So let's see how we go anyway, and we'll take it from there. We'll take it as it comes, fingers crossed. So let's just cast our minds back. If we, 100 years ago sounds a tremendous amount of time, it certainly does to my children, my teenage kids, but 100 years ago isn't that long. And if you opened an atlas from this time, this is actually from the Scottish Geographic Journal, 1894, and what you can see there is a few bits of pink denoting hypothesized pieces of coastline. Some of it was actually made up for the Antarctic, and then of course Australia, New Zealand and South America. But large part of it is just blank, and a lot of the atlases from 100 years ago just had unexplored regions slapped all over it. And if you had any doubts over who owned it, they usually put this outline of the British Isles right over the South Geographic Pole, just to put it in context. And for my Australian friends and colleagues, that meant home as well. But we're going to focus here on Commonwealth Bay, which was a major focus of the expedition. But for the previous few years, myself and Chris have been working in the Ellsworth Mountains in what is known as West Antarctica. And West Antarctica, unlike the East, is primarily sitting on seabed. And that area is still relatively unexplored. The area we've been working in was really only mapped properly in the 70s, so when I was born, which is really not long ago at all. If we're going to set a bit of a context and see why Mawson went south, we really have to go to this great man. And it's amazing how a century later, these individuals, there was a group of them, Shackleton, Scott, Amundsen, Mawson, who were all contemporaries. And it's amazing a century on how we're still talking about these amazing endeavours. And of course, in the next year, Shackleton's famous Endeavour expedition, there'll be another centenary there with what this great man achieved. But his first expedition that he led to Antarctica was known as the British Antarctic Expedition. You might know it as a Nimrod. And it was incredibly ambitious. The aim was to get to the South Geographic Pole, the magnetic pole, and also find a few minerals on the way. And he said at the time, he said, "I do not intend to sacrifice the scientific ability of the expedition to a mere record-breaking journey." So he was really keen on keeping the science up front. And part of the reason for that was purely finance. You had to convince scientific bodies and institutions like the Royal Institution, like the Royal Society, the Royal Geographical Society, that what you were doing made sense. If you wanted to just pogo stick to the South Pole, they'd just tell you to leave. You had to make observations. And of course, this was an entirely new continent being discovered. So Shackleton went around trying to find the best people he could. And coming through Australia, he was very fortunate to meet one of the probably greatest unsung heroes of Antarctic exploration and science, a man called Professor Edgeworth David. And he was a professor of geology at Sydney. He was a remarkable character. In 1904, he arguably gave the most controversial lecture in Australasian history. It went completely unrecorded. He said Australians were obsessed with sport. They should stop obsessing about it. They should get on and understand science because it's good for you. And of course, the press didn't report it at all. And 100 years later, we're still having arguably the same debate. When I first started talking about this, it was the Olympics, and I went quiet. I didn't really talk about it. But one of the things he said at the time was that he said that geography is like charity, and it should begin at home. We have this whole continent, Australia, on our doorstep. Why worry about Antarctica? A few years later, Shackleton comes through, and he agrees to join Shackleton. And Edgeworth David suddenly realizes that actually Antarctica is a great way of engaging the public. You've got adventure, you've got exploration, and you can do a huge amount of science. And it was a recognition at the time that there were huge questions about not only the climate of Australia, being highly dependent on this region to the south called Antarctica, but also the geological history. And we'll have a little look about this a little later. But he said as president, he said, it should, I think, be one of the aims of this association to discover and destroy the microbe of sporting mania. Absolutely fantastic. When he heard that, when the word got out that Edgeworth David was going south with Shackleton, Mawson wrote to him and he said, I should dearly have loved to go myself, and shall in any case go with you as far as my imagination can carry me. That's a remarkable statement, and it's one of these things that endeared Mawson to Edgeworth David, and as a result recommended him to Shackleton. But what I'd like to show you today is you can use more of an imagination. You can take people to Antarctica with you virtually. The technology allows us to do this. So Mawson, Shackleton already had a geologist, so Mawson suddenly became the physicist on the expedition. And it was a relatively great success. They didn't actually achieve really any of their aims. They got very close. Here's Edgeworth David in the middle with Mawson to his right. This is in early 1909, in the vicinity of the South Magnetic Pole, the area of the world at the southern hemisphere where the magnetic field is pointing up, down, almost vertically. They didn't quite get there, but they got very, very close. You can just see the string coming out from Edgeworth David in the middle where he's pulling the camera, and they're up on the plateau at over 2,000 meters, and it was the longest unsupported sledging journey till the 1980s. They walked nearly 1,450 kilometers, which is remarkable. Edgeworth David was 51 at the time and was almost delusional at the end. He was walking on his ankles, a poor man, talking to himself. And Alistair Mackay, the Scottish doctor just there to his right, basically was kicking him up the pants the whole way to get him back to the coast. And by amazing odds, they survived and came back to report the story. But Mawson was the great hero of effectively leading the expedition. Shackleton, of course, get very close to the South Geographic Pole, within 100 miles, and then decided to turn away. And Shackleton was the great poet and had these fantastic turns of phrases. Death stalks us from behind, food lies ahead. It was just fantastic poetry. And they got back, and they basically, at the late age of in the late 30s, the men there on the picture on the right looked like old men by that point. The journey nearly killed them. It was remarkable that no one survived, and the birth of the Shackleton legend began.
And throughout all this, I was helped by a party of men who were regardless of themselves and only thinking of the good of the expedition. I, Ernest Shackleton, have today, March the 30th, dictated this record.
There's Shackleton using some of the earliest technology. If you want to hear that in full, it's a full 2.5 minutes on the National Film and Sound Archive. Or go to my website, christurney.com, you'll find the link there. And that was the longest recording they could make, and he sold that to raise revenue. Of course, students nowadays, you talk to them and they've got podcasts of thousands of songs on their iPhones, but 2.5 minutes was absolutely cutting-edge technology, and it raised much valued funds for these expeditions because they weren't cheap. These were not cheap. These were private ventures. But big questions remained. 100 years ago, there was a recognition that actually a large amount of the geology, flora and fauna of the southern continents was very similar, and they couldn't understand it. This was all pre-plate tectonics. And the idea at the time was effectively the continent somewhere around the vicinity of Antarctica had linked them all together by land bridges, sort of Atlantis equivalent, and at some point in the time had sunk below the waves. So people were looking for evidence that these land bridges had sunk. And Mawson was determined to do so. Mawson was determined to try and find this. But he also wanted to find out what lay south. And in 1911, led an expedition with huge ambitious aims to cover over 2,000 miles of coastline. There were 5 expeditions going south in 1912. Mawson was the only one not going for the South Geographic Pole. It was purely scientific, but he wanted to hit the South Magnetic Pole and actually clinch that properly. He was 27 years old. The expedition cost of the order of around £40,000. That doesn't sound much today. That's the equivalent of around $25 million. And he raised that in a year, which is absolutely incredible. He brought a huge scientific team together, the Aurora, as an ice-strengthened vessel to take him south. And he had all these other fundraising revenue schemes to try to raise the funds to get south, one of which was taking the first plane south. This was a Vickers plane. They took it down to Adelaide, and the idea was for £5 you could get a flight over the Adelaide racecourse. That was the idea. First one up was the Governor-General of South Australia. Night before, the pilot got drunk and crashed it. Hence why there was no wings. He was sent home. He was very disappointed. He said he'd never had a plane accident before, and then promptly had another one when he got back to Britain. Watkins was his name. So they took the wings off and they took it south, and they called it an air tractor, and there's marvellous film footage of this wingless plane. But sadly, it wasn't as great a success as possible, but it captured people's imaginations. They did a huge amount of science. I'll show you some of the work that they did. But basically, they had 3 teams straddling across from Macquarie Island at 54 degrees south. Mawson's hut was the main base, and also a 3rd base on the Shackleton ice shelf. They had weather observations going all at the same time. The blurry image up in the top right is the first photo ever successfully taken of the Aurora Australis, the southern lights, 10-second exposure, so hence the blur. But on top of that, we also had the second-in-command, Davis, taking the ship Aurora around, looking for this sunken land bridge that never came. He couldn't find it anywhere. It was dropping soundings all over. But they made temperature, salinity measurements of the ocean as they went. Covered a huge map of Southern Ocean. These are the plot. This is where the Aurora went over 3 or 4 years of the expedition, all the way over the Southern Ocean, trying to find this wretched land bridge, while also provisioning those bases. Sometimes they came close to starvation, had to live off the land, particularly on Macquarie Island. When he wasn't servicing a base, he was also visiting some of these sub-Antarctic islands, and it wasn't a happy ship. It wasn't a happy ship at all. Mawson and the team were all there. They were set up with a wireless system, broadcasting observations as they went back home. But he also took someone whose name you might recognise, a Professor Flynn from the University of Tasmania. It was Errol Flynn's dad. Bit of a ladies' man, apparently, like father, like son. And also, apparently, bone idle, according to Davis. He said they come on a cheap holiday. They both lay on the hatch while I and the mate have been working hard all day. And the diary is fantastic. He just goes on about him all the time. Got all the sulks. I'm very sorry I have these people on board. Now whaling, it's not daylight. I have to go to bed. And this was rather sad. The trip is chiefly remarkable for the amount of grumbling and slackness consequent in having passengers aboard the ship who have nothing to do and are too lazy to employ themselves in any way but by making mischief. Chris and I were determined this wouldn't happen on our ship, and I hasten to add that did not happen. But he was also very fortunate, because science isn't just about actually making measurements, reporting them. It's also about actually communicating that. And he was extremely fortunate. He got a young Australian photographer called Frank Hurley, who famously ran in and jumped into his train carriage, leaving, I think, Sydney at the time, imploring him to take him. And he wrote in September 1911, "I need scarcely add, in the interests of science and love of photographic art, no diligent perseverance, thought, and originality would be lacking to ensure success in my department." And he completely excelled. Scott had Hubert Ponting, Mawson had Frank Hurley, and the photography was quite astounding. And if you follow the Endurance expedition, those classic photos of Shackleton's vessel locked in the sea ice, that was Frank Hurley's work. This is actually taken from Mawson's hut. This is Hurley's dark room, and you might be able to make out just in pencil there, near enough is not good enough. So he was a complete perfectionist. Remarkable man. And he also took film. He took some of the earliest film footage. This is from the National Film and Sound Archive. This is arguably the first documentary movie ever made, at least that we still have preserved. And unfortunately for Mawson and his team, they landed in the windiest place in the world, at least it's in the Guinness Book of Records, or was at that. Average wind speeds of 70 kilometers an hour, driven by these incredible katabatic winds, these cold, dense winds that form on the plateau and then spill down towards the coast. If you're familiar with opening a freezer and you see the cold air pouring out, very similar, but a lot bigger, a lot colder. That was the first bit of rock they found that they put the main base. And so this was Cape Denison. This was the film footage. Now, it's one thing saying 70 kilometers an hour with hurricane speeds of 200, but this film footage captures it beautifully. They walked at a distinctive 45-degree angle. They'd have races on the wooden crates. Rather scarily, the water was just to the left there, so if they got swept into the ocean, that was it. And this was a common day. And here comes the traditional 45-degree gate. And there's a lot of pickaxes being used in this film footage. Why no one died from a pickaxe, I'll never know. But this is some fantastic footage here, collecting ice for, and possibly a body to eat, I don't know. Wonderful. Difficult conditions, difficult conditions. But Mawson famously, even though he did a huge amount of science, it was arguably what actually happened on the ice that led to his fame. When he was on the ice, different sledging teams moved out into the interior to take observations, map. They found the first meteorite in Antarctica. Mawson decided to head across the southeast towards where Scott was operating in the Ross Sea. And this is a story that's not very well known in Australia, but basically he took two men, Ninnis and Mertz, and the idea was with the dogs they were going to drive out and try to link across to Scotland to put this coastline together. Unfortunately for them, about 500 kilometers out, they hit a heavily crevassed field area. Decided to go single file. And so Mertz, who was a Swiss champion skier, led first, then Mawson, and then Belgrave Ninnis, who was a British Fusilier officer, came in last. And they put all the good food, all the main food, all the good dogs, most of the clothing, a spare tent, on that final sledge. So if anyone else got caught in the crevasse, that would be okay. Working their way through, Mertz just turns to Mawson and shrugs his shoulders. And Mawson looks behind, and there's no one there. And they look back and go back, and there's an enormous crevasse which the other two guys have walked over, the snow bridge, and Ninnis has disappeared into it. They can't see him, they can't even hear him. They see the back of the sledge, a dog whining, and nothing else. So it's been 3.5 weeks to get out to this location, and they've got 1.5 weeks worth of food left. Plus, they also lost a great friend. After a while, they tried to work out what they could do, and they decided the best way was just to try and get back, and going the most direct route they'd come. They hadn't left any depots because they hadn't expected to go that route. And amazingly, even when the day that Ninnis died, they were still taking weather observations, even that first day. And as they worked their way back, they started basically eating the dogs. And the dogs, the livers in particular, have fatal doses, basically, of vitamin A. And it looks like Mertz ate too much. And as they walked, they not only became incredibly tired, they started feeling very weak, their hair started falling out. Mawson's soles of his feet fell off. He'd strap them on every morning with lanolin. Mertz, though, eventually couldn't struggle anymore, had diarrhea, became incredibly weak, in a fit of insanity, bit his finger off, and then died. And Mawson was on his own. He was still over 150 kilometers away from home. And he was running late now. The Aurora was due back in, and he was on his own. 3 days he sat there, arguably because the weather was too bad, but I think most of us probably would have started wondering what we were doing. But he still took weather observations. And as he plugged on, he kept walking and walking, and then he fell down a crevasse and left swinging 4 meters below. And he was, by chance, hooked on by the rope to the actual sledge. Crawling out 4 hours later, he passed out. And then decided he'd make together a rope ladder and actually strap that around himself and the sledge and keep going. And he fell into several other crevasses and just nonchalantly walked back out. He got about 25 kilometers out, found a small cairn, some food. There was a message saying, Scott's staying another year, Amundsen's got to the South Pole, hope everyone's all right. It was left that morning, and he couldn't see anyone at all. He was so weak. Pushing on, 5 kilometers out from the actual Cape Denison hut, he got into this small ice cave. They called it Aladdin's Cave. It was dug into the top of a glacier. He found a pineapple, some oranges, and refreshed, he was just ready to go, and this enormous blizzard kicked in, the same that we saw from that film footage. For 5 days he was stuck there, couldn't get out at all, knowing he was so close. He spent the time putting nails into his shoes to make improvised crampons, and I'll show you some photos a little later of what that area is like. It's very steep and very slippery. You definitely want crampons. As he came out, he decided he was going to go for it after 5 days, and he came out the corner. He could just see smoke on the horizon. The Aurora had left that day, that morning, and he was stuck for another year. Absolutely incredible story. 4 other people stayed behind to look after him, and they couldn't get back out. The Aurora couldn't get back in to get them. The ship had to go and save the other team on the Shackleton ice shelf, and he was stuck there another year. In truth, it was probably quite well. Mawson had suffered from terrible seasickness and would probably not survived the journey anyway. So they kept the measurements going for another year. And that's important because not only do we have this fantastic continuous record from Macquarie Island, we have 2 years' worth of observational data from this special part of Antarctica. And most sites, apart from a few key bases on the Antarctic continent, most of the data we rely on is actually from satellite information for the late 70s, so it's a very special data set. And it's an area of phenomenal interest, not just because, it's at the end of the planet. It has global implications. There are massive changes going on at the moment. The rectangular box shows the area of interest that we covered and basically Mawson's expedition focused on primarily. But the westerly winds in the southern hemisphere, much like the ones we experience here in Britain, are moving south at the moment. There's big changes in this enormous, the world's largest current, the Antarctic circumpolar current. More than 70% of the energy from the world's winds goes into the ACC, and that's pushing south as well, speeding up. And as it's doing so, it's bringing warmer water up to the surface around the coastlines of many parts of Antarctica. So there's big changes in sea surface temperature. As we'll also show you, it's an area where a large part of the thermohaline circulation system, the global conveyor belt that drives the ocean circulation, happens here in this region. In fact, 25% of what they call the Antarctic bottom water is formed just in this area. There's changes in the amount of ice cover on the sea as well. Plus, on top of that, we don't know what impact changes are happening on the biology in this area. And the particular area why this is so dynamic in this area is an Antarctic equivalent of billiards, basically. A few years ago, this enormous iceberg came out of the Ross Sea called B-09B, inspired names. And this one came around and swung around the coast, following around, and knocked off nearly 100 kilometers of what's known as the Mertz Glacier Tongue, named after Xavier Mertz. Huge area. and knocked that off and completely disrupted circulation in the area. And B-09B then ground itself in Commonwealth Bay just off Cape Denison. And the result is this enormous area has been locked up in sea ice. And that's actually representative of a broader change, actually, that we're seeing across a large part of the East Antarctic. Unlike the Arctic, which is this huge area of sea ice surrounded, well, in the Arctic over the North Pole, is a huge amount of sea ice surrounded by continents. Antarctica is the exact opposite. You've got three enormous ice sheets holding up to 70 meters worth of global sea level rise, surrounded by sea ice. So it's a completely different situation. And in many parts of Antarctica, you're seeing about a 1% increase in the amount of extent sea ice per decade over the last few decades. That's one of the big questions. What's driving that? Is it changes in the wind circulation? People are suggesting the winds have strengthened, crumping up the ice, making it thicker, harder to melt in the summer. Other people have argued that actually what's happening is this upwelling of warmer water from down below is melting the underneath of the ice sheets themselves. And because that's fresher water, it's less dense, it comes to the surface, and it's more easy to freeze. And then you're getting more extensive sea ice that way. But the idea is that under normal circumstances during the summertime, the Antarctic coastline is large areas of them are what we call ice factories. As these enormous catabatic winds blow off the surface, they freeze the surface and they take the sea ice out. As they do so, as you freeze the water, the saltiness in the water is expelled, and this really dense cold water sinks and flows down along the bottom of the coast on the seabed, and that's called Antarctic bottom water. So there's huge areas, and the idea is that if you've disrupted that circulation system by this enormous berg, maybe there's been global implications from that. If it forms 25% of the Antarctic bottom water, maybe there's global implications. And work that was done a couple of years ago suggested that had indeed happened. The whole thing had shut down. There was potentially a massive regime shift. People had gone in there and suggested big changes. Just out of curiosity, though, one thing I was always struck by was the fact that actually this was an amazing heyday of science communication. This is a completely unscientific chart. It's looking at the Times newspaper, the London Times, and it's mentions of the word Antarctic in an article. And so the first 10 years are 1906 to 1915, right into the First World War, and the second one is a more recent decade. The darker colour is the earlier period. Now, admittedly, it fluctuates wildly, but even with a limited amount of pages from 100 years ago, you still exceeded the number of articles where we mentioned Antarctica there in 1913 and than any time in the last 10 years or so. So it was an area that people were fundamentally interested in. I think there's lessons to be learned from that. So crucially, we decided we wanted to go south. Not just building on Mawson's work, but looking at other angles and aspects of previous work people had done. And the idea was to take a team of scientists down to actually look at what changes are happening in this region and the interconnectedness of this region to the rest of the world. The biology, the oceanography, the climate. This is not something where you have a very targeted single route. You need a broad multidisciplinary base. And we are very fortunate we had a fantastic team of scientists from around the world who came to join us. Ultimately, we had 20 scientists involved, 20 science communicators, we had logistics and medical staff, and we had 27 science volunteers. This was primarily looking to try to actually engage a public in a way that isn't really done today. 100 years ago, there wasn't an Antarctic survey or a division at all. So yeah, if you wanted to go south and make discoveries, you had to get people interested and excited. You had to engage the science institutions, you had to talk to the media, do Shackleton's recordings. You had to get out there and get people excited enough to support your work and show why it was relevant. So not only did we have the science team, we used some of those lessons from 100 years ago. We got people involved. We advertised berths for people who could actually help us, who wanted to get engaged and help with the science, citizen scientists. We advertised on the blog using the old Shackleton quote about, well, it's probably apocryphal, saying there are possibilities of fame and fortune if you wish to come and join us on the expeditions. PhD students, people who were going to be the next group of science communicators, and had to do a 3-minute YouTube movie as an interview to show why they were such great science communicators. So we took 20 of those down in the first and second leg as a way of getting them to communicate with the public. We were very, very fortunate. So this is just a small group from all realms of the different disciplines that we were interested in. And we worked together for 2 years to get a science manual together, people to talk, actually ideas, buying equipment, gear that we'd anticipate before we left. A lot of these times you go on these sort of trips, it's only when you're actually sitting down, you suddenly think of something and you can't just pop down the shops and bring anything else back with you. We had a large number of science parties, both nationally and internationally, Argo, Scripps, groups where we put a lot of equipment into the ocean for monitoring. Even though the expedition was only planned for 6 weeks, or 4 weeks, sorry, the idea was that many of the devices we were going to leave were going to be left there for several years, and they're still going, which is great. And I'll show you some of the results of this. You can actually monitor and see how they're going. So there's a longer-term legacy, trying to understand how this system works. And we also thought it was important as well to support the conservation work of Mawson Hut. This is an important piece of heritage, particularly for us in Australia. And so taking a conservation team and dedicating time and resource for those guys to actually see much needed repairs. With the arrival of B-09B, no one has been in across the surface for the last 3 years. So it was really important to try and get in and get a team there. And that was the key thing. This was an area of major research questions. And unlike many of the other places where there are research bases, this was an area where no one was really going to. And so we felt this was important. This was a small funded science program answering big questions rather than these incredibly important long-term research programs. So you've got the two in parallel. We feel there's a space for this where you have small science answering really specific questions where you can be fleet of foot and using the lessons from 100 years ago. And communication is so important. Frank Hurley, Mawson showed us this. And technology allows us to do this. We use all sorts of technology. I'll show you some examples of what we did when we went south. But we took some of the finest satellite technology available from Inmarsat, an HDR system. It's almost broadband capability, and it was within reach as far south as we went. So we could communicate as we went. So before we left, we were writing blogs, doing interviews, showing people what we were doing. As we went south, we were showing people not just the results, but how we were making these discoveries, what equipment we were using. 49,000 followers on Google+. On YouTube, we were loading up movie footage, showing people what we were doing. Little movie clips, 1-2 minutes, nothing too long. And on Twitter, we were also putting tweets up. You can use those on satellite phones. It's so easy nowadays. You don't actually need a very expensive satellite system for that. We did Vines as well. So those are 6-second video clips. We did sound clouds. We did loaded up audio, and I'll show you a little bit of that as well. And of course, Facebook. And the way was actually showing results in real time, not reporting it when we got back, because that's what I usually do when I'm a scientist. You get home and you tell your family and friends and a few people who might be interested, but actually telling people as you go and getting engagement. On the first leg, we did the Sub-Antarctic, so this is the red route, just showing here. We went to Snares Island, Campbell Island at 50 degrees, Auckland Island at 50 degrees, and Campbell Island at 52 degrees. A large team working across in the oceans, seeing our first whales were there, and looking at the trees and the peats. We were interested in the tree line, this upper level of tree growth in the Sub-Antarctic. Dracophyllum and Rata on Auckland Island reach several hundred meters above sea level. It gets a bit diffuse. This is called Lake Speight's, which is quite a well-known beer in New Zealand, which got people very thirsty a lot of the time, but sadly there wasn't anything there. But the tree line goes around that area and then seems to sort of go up a little bit further. But it doesn't seem to have risen much, which is intriguing because the areas had quite variable temperatures. But we're trying to understand that. We were taking tree ring samples, and I'll show you some examples of this, I think in a moment. We're also looking at invasion. This was an example. This is Olearia. It's come from Snares Island, probably in southern New Zealand. This is in Auckland Island now. It's a very aggressive plant. It's moving around the Auckland Island coast. It's a huge beast. Kerry Jane Wilson, who was with us, was the ornithologist. She went to Auckland Island about 20 years ago and remembered this island in particular, where she could walk in quite casually. This time you were almost on all fours a lot of the time trying to get through. So taking peat cores under the canopy from there to look at the pollen from that tree species to try to work out when it actually arrived. So as you go back through time, you can try and date that. So that's some work we're currently doing at the moment. This is an example. These are snares-crested penguins just in the middle here, and you can see this very brown patch around them. And these guys are attacked by skuas. If you're a fan of any Antarctic books, they often talk about skuas. They're horrible birds. They dive bomb you at any opportunity, anything at all. And penguins in particular. And so basically the penguins find support and relief from actually getting into the vegetation. And of course they defecate, they kill the vegetation, and then they move further in. So there's this wave of feces, I guess. So they basically move into the interior of the island, trying to hide from the skuas. So we were taking some peat cores from there, trying to get an understanding of how the dynamics have changed. But we're also taking some of the first ocean cores. This is Chris Fogwell, Chris, who I mentioned earlier, who'd led a large part of this, actually taken some cores from in Carnley Harbour in Auckland Island. And they've just finally cleared quarantine. Took us 6 months of paperwork, but finally just got cleared. So we're starting to work on those now. But also we can actually see evidence of a former ice age. So here in the northern end of Auckland Island, you've got evidence of glacial expansion right down to sea level. This was first described back in the 70s. So we've been taking samples for this to try to get an idea not only of the vegetation changes around this period of time, but also the timing. And working across other parts of the island, you can see these amazing hanging, well not hanging valleys, cirque glaciers up on the hill slopes. And so a lot of the teams went through that. That looks quite normal vegetation. That is dense bush. It was like sending people off to suicide. They were just hacked to bits. They came back exhausted, trying to fight their way through dense bush. You could almost walk on the surface of this stuff. And then occasionally you'd be with someone, they just disappear. They drop through and then you wouldn't see them again for ages. And then in amongst all this, just to sort of keep the adrenaline running, are sea lions that seem to go right up the top of these hills and bark and chase. And they're a lot more agile under that vegetation than you are. So a lot of people lost a lot of weight very quickly with that. But alongside this, we also took something where we could actually measure the seabed, actually map the seabed. And we were using this to actually see if we could get a handle on what the limits were of these glaciers from around 15 to 20,000 years ago. And this is just one example. In the bottom right, this is the sensor from this, where actually you can see in the orange and yellow an extension of these moraines, this glacial rubble, actually going in under the water surface. And so as a result of that, you can map that, you can work out the elevation, you get a feeling for what the temperature and rainfall or snowfall might have been at that time, 15, 20,000 years ago. So it's in Perseverance Harbour at Campbell Island. So it's as far south as we got on the first leg. This was one of the hazards I was talking about. That was the most stable photograph we took of sea lions. But in amongst those, we were taking samples from Dracophyllum. This is one of the trees. It seems to be sensitive to temperature. That's showing you what the tree ring patterns maybe look like. But actually, that's the size of a coaster. And there can be up to 150 rings in something just a few centimeters across, but very slow growing. But that's remarkable because the weather observations, the weather stations from that area really only go back to the early 40s. If you can get a handle on that, then you can actually get a sense of what the climate has changed in the past. And we've got a measure now going about 110 years or so, so extending our meteorological data set going further back. And there's quite a pronounced warming at around 1970-71, which is exceptional compared to the last 120 years, so that's intriguing. But alongside this, a lot of the team, Graham Clark, Emma Johnson and the team were actually looking at the seabed around these islands because they're remarkable areas of biodiversity. And one of the workhorses, basically, of expedition were GoPro cameras. It was an outrageous bit of advertising. But GoPro cameras were fantastic. We set them up. They set them up with food traps, a tin of tuna, and you leave them for half an hour and you just leave the camera ticking away. So this just shows, this is what some of the footage was like from the islands. Sometimes lots of crabs, a few fishes. But this is from the actual Sub-Antarctic islands on Auckland and Snares and Campbell. And actually, this has never been done before. So working with the Department of Conservation in New Zealand, actually bringing this data together to help with the management. And what the guys can do is take screen grabs from this, and actually from this, get a sense of what actual life is actually there. It can quantify the numbers, not just of the fish, but also the kelp and the like. And I'll show you something what we found actually. There you go. Not so impressed. Beautiful footage. 100 years ago, you'd have to dredge. Now you can do it passively almost. Wonderful film footage. And later on, when we had more time on the ship than we planned, the team spent a lot of time working through this film footage, actually measuring what they saw on those islands. So it was a great use of time in that respect. But although that looks very healthy on the seabed itself around the coast, actually on the islands themselves, not so great. And this is one example. This is from Figure of 8 Island in Auckland Island. It was supposedly the third largest sea lion colony on Auckland Island. And this is symptomatic of what's happening a lot across a lot of these islands. There are no sea lions. It was right in the mating season, there were no males at all. When Kerry Jane was there 20, 30 years ago, it was a quagmire of mud. You can see some few hollows there, but there's nothing. In fact, when we were there with Department of Conservation guys, they were expected to see a lot. We were going to go there we were in fact warned not to take people there because they're very aggressive, of course, at mating season. But we actually found there was nothing there. This is a lot of the different, not just penguins as well as sea lions. Population's falling a bit in these areas. Quite significantly. I'm trying to understand why. It's an important area of research. We returned back to Bluffo in southern New Zealand where we'd left, and then we headed south again. And this time the idea was to go to Macquarie Island and into Commonwealth Bay. It's actually, I think, the first bit of a photo actually showing of our vessel, the Shackleton. We were heading south. We couldn't get to Macquarie Island, unfortunately. The conditions were too rough, so we pushed on into through the sea ice. And while we were going, Kerry Jane spent a large amount of time actually looking at the bird life and doing counts every 10 minutes during awake hours, I should say, from the front and back of the ship. And this is an example of what she found, traveling all the way from New Zealand all the way down to Antarctica, looking at different species of birds, crossing the latitudes all the way. I was a bit disappointed, actually. The grey columns are where Kerry Jane went to sleep, which was very disappointing, and just a key pass. But so we're working that out, and with Eric Van Sibyl and the team looking at the seafronts, actually comparing what the population changes were with oceanographic boundaries. And as we were approaching Antarctica, we crossed what's known as the Antarctic convergence, the northern limit of the Antarctic circumpolar current with the warmer sub-Antarctic waters. And it's an area of hugely dynamic, a huge amount of biodiversity, but dropping a variety of different sensors through the water column as we went. We could measure temperature as we went, and this and many of the team helped doing this. In fact, this was an experiment that went on 40 hours. Every hour, various things were dropped over the side of Eric and Chris leading. And this is just showing a plot here of the temperature changes as we cross the convergence. And you see the red going through into the blue near the surface as you cross that convergence. And alongside this, we also dropped drifters. These are pairs of drifters that we released from the back of the Shackleton as we crossed the convergence. And the areas of grey are the actual fronts. The Antarctic convergence is sometimes likened to a blanket around Antarctica, but it's a blanket with holes in. And that exchange of heat and salinity is an area of great uncertainty, particularly with climate models. So putting the drifters in, we can actually see how, what the response of eddies, the role of eddies, how the flow takes place, what is actually getting through the Antarctic convergence. Sometimes they just stop still, sometimes they go in these incredibly elegant dances around each other, and other times they just spin off. But they seem to stick together quite well. So this movie goes up to the end of April. Eric's been working hard with Stephanie Waterman and others, but it's a wonderful piece of work, and they're still going. Some have barely moved at all. But as we got closer, we started breaking through the sea ice, and we started getting close. And this is a satellite imagery just showing you what the sea ice conditions were like just coming up to the approach. You can see the outline of B-09B. That's the size of what we know as Australian Capital Territory, or Luxembourg, if you're familiar with that. Iceberg doesn't do it credit. It's a small country, basically, floating around. That area of ice, that solid ice, that's known as fast ice, it's locked fast to the continent. And it's been growing for the last few years. And Cape Denison, as you can see in the red there, is actually the site of the hut. As we went, we were doing plankton and plastic tows. It was amazing how much rubbish, even in the Southern Ocean, we were finding. That was heartbreaking. There was analysis on board. The team members, the volunteers as well, were helping with sorting all this. And then we reached the Antarctic. We got through the sea ice. Here's Alok on the back just after we reached Antarctica. And that's the satellite system we were using to communicate and also upload the latest satellite information. Most of the time when you go on these expeditions, you bring your friends back home and see what the sea ice conditions are like. This was an opportunity where we could download the imagery and use the 60-plus years of experience on the ship. But it was also very good for sending vines as well and Google Plus articles. This is just an illustration of what you can do with Google+. This is a hangout on there. So if you're familiar with Skype, you can talk to 9, 10 other people simultaneously with Hangout on there. But the beautiful thing about this, if you wish to be a voyeur, is you can broadcast it live to the world. So it's like having your own TV channel. And so we can actually broadcast live what we were doing. So here I am with Kerry Jane, with a pathetic example of a beard, I'm afraid, but talking about the Adelie penguins just behind us. And just to the far right, you can see an emperor penguin that just turned up. So Kerry Jane is talking about these penguins, but not loaded up after the event. Actually, at the time, we were broadcasting this live. And this is the quality. I've not gone back and resampled. This is actually the quality we're broadcasting. So the sound's not quite so good.
The Ice Edge is one of the most exciting places to be for wildlife. The Adelie penguins, leaving from their colonies some kilometres away, pause here before they leap into the sea out on their next fishing trip. Those who are on their way home leap out of the water onto the ice edge and sit around for a while before they proceed back to their colony. We've also seen Wilson storm petrels, giant petrels, fulmars, skuas, all hanging around here on the ice edge.
Fantastic, Kerry Jane. So how many Adelie penguins, are they just come here for the summer, or are they here?
Yeah, Adelies are here just for the summer. They live in the pack ice after they finish breeding in January.
Oh my lord!
Oh my god!
There's an orca. Can you just see? I don't know if anyone caught that. That was an orca. It just blasted. There we go. Are we on screen, Vic? Kerry Jane, can you just? You have to pop down. Kilo.
I can't see with my.
Hang on. We'll see if we can. Get that back again. That was extraordinary. Shackleton there in the background. The ice flow has opened up a little bit, and there was an orca. Oh, there we go. Is that there?
Yep.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Right.
That is extraordinary.
Well,
I'm afraid I like the word extraordinary. We couldn't believe it. We never saw. We saw killer whales, or orcas, I should say, quite a few times, but We were broadcasting that live. That was just a magical moment to do that. And you can see as soon as the Orca turned up, Aviation is all just scarpered. It had obviously seen a couple in the distance, but that was live. That was broadcasting Antarctica live. But we were very fortunate as well. We had some fantastic communicators on board. Along with Alok, we had Lawrence from The Guardian, and we also had a superb photographer and doctor, Andrew Peacock, who is from Footloose Photography. And Andrew took some of the fantastic photos that many of you may have seen. He also did some superb time-lapse photography, and this was one example. He got set up with the Adelie penguins, just to sort of show you the sort of thing. Very fortunate, an emperor penguin just turned up just when he was doing this. Very absolutely gorgeous creatures. In the fine traditions of Mawson and Shackleton, you've got to show penguins. Well, the Australasian Antarctic Expedition of 2013-14 finally made it to Mawson's hut. It's right here behind me. It took about 4 hours travelling across the sea ice, and the next bit of film footage will show you the route we took. Amazingly, the weather though has improved today, and it's been about 3 to 4 degrees. It's ridiculously warm.
Look confident, but yeah, it's amazing actually. You can't see. Yeah, that's exactly right. No, I still think. Yeah, I'll take this one right out. I think the going is going to be like this for a while now. I'm quite shocked.
These are called all-terrain vehicles, or Argos, and they were incredibly capable, especially this one here with the tracks. Nothing seemed to stop it. It's basically a boat with wheels on. It can float if it breaks through. They're just incredibly stable, safe machines. And that's the only reason we got to Mawson's Hut. This was a 65-kilometre journey through sea ice, and that should be on the coastline. It's completely locked in by ice now. And again, that's the quality we were broadcasting. It was remarkable to come through this because we were actually working our way around, trying to probe. We kept going into dead ends, work our way back. It took 4 hours or so, but it was a real privilege to go on a journey like that because no one had ever done that route before. And it was almost like going through an iceberg alley. And there's a lovely quote Ernest Shackleton once wrote. It says, "He falls to the lot of a few men and women we had on our team, to view not previously seen by human eyes. It was with feelings of keen curiosity, not unmingled with awe, that we watched the new mountains rise from the great unknown that lay ahead of us. And certainly when we saw those rocks and Cape Denison in the distance and knew we were going to get there, that was a remarkable sense of achievement. It was quite very special." And really, it was thanks to Chris. Chris did a huge amount of work logistically, getting all this together, getting us the training on the Argos, pulling the teams in, provisioning and everything. And finally, we got there, and as you say, it got above 4 degrees centigrade. It was so warm. It was so warm. It was getting close to the warmest temperatures Mawson ever experienced there. In fact, there was an actual river flowing out from Mawson's Hut, Cape Denison. We almost got trapped by a torrent. It was actually getting a bit dangerous getting away. But the hut was extraordinary. And this is just going to show a little bit of the inside. We've just cleared the entrance to Mawson's Hut, so let's go in and take a look. There was a large amount of snow and ice that blocked the door. The guys have done a great job. And it takes a while just to adjust your eyes for a moment, so I'll go in a bit slowly. It's the porch. Double door system. This is the workroom. There's not a lot actually of the original gear in here. And taking this door through to the right is the main living and cooking area. Gosh. 18 men lived in there. It's tiny space. Storage area. That's the kitchen stove and food preparation area. There's still quite a lot of ice and snow in here actually. Some leftover food by the looks of it. Old drinks, Imperial Stout, McKinley's malt whiskey. Empty, sadly. That's Frank Hurley's dark room, and in there is written in pencil, "Near enough is not good enough." And you can see the letters and initials of people, members of a team, and where they stayed. Apparently the worst area was the far side, the southern side. The snow would still get through, even though they were boarded up. But the team was there. Part of the team there was actually in Mawson's hut, the conservators. This is a time-lapse photograph system just showing digging out Mawson's hut. It went from grey when we first arrived to a beautiful blue sky. We kept pensively looking up onto the top of the plateau, expecting to see these Calabatic winds pour off, and it just never happened. And it was quite remarkable. It was a sunny day, and that dog outline you might see there, that's called Stay. Stay is basically a mascot of the Australian Antarctic Division. It periodically gets stolen from one base and taken secretly to another one. And it had been left at Mawson's hut. And of course, when the iceberg came in, it had got stuck there, as its name implied. And basically, we rescued Stay. So Stay is now somewhere, possibly at Casey, but no one knows. They wouldn't tell us, so don't know where Stay is. But while we were there, we did a lot of work. We tried coring the ice. This is top left there is just above Cape Denison. The actual hut itself, remarkable blue ice, exposed, ancient ice that's welling up. We did bird counts of the penguins. There's been a huge collapse now of the Adelie penguin population. Kerry Jane actually managed to count the entire population across all the different rookeries. They're now commuting 65 kilometres to get the food for their youngs, and so the population just is catastrophically collapsing. So another 10 years or so, there probably won't be many left. It's fascinating. As an adult, apparently, they return to where they grew up. It's only that first year or so as a juvenile when they first return that they'll look at alternative locations. So that older population that knew Cape Denison will keep going, and the younger ones might move on somewhere else. And when we were driving out and in, you'd see these little convoys of Adelie penguins, the ones we saw at the sea ice age. And it's almost like the freeway. They follow in single file. They keep themselves very busy. They'll periodically stop. They almost look like they're going to have a cigarette break. Some of them fall onto their stomachs. Others chat, a couple fight. And then they carry on again, and you'll go the other way completely. It's two different worlds. It's beautiful to see that. We looked at tried to repair the automatic weather station. Sadly, that didn't prove repairable, but we salvaged the data. And we also collected a huge amount of rocks as well from the area to actually get a handle on how the ice sheet had changed over the last 15,000 years. This is for a dating technique, cosmogenic dating, some of you may be familiar with, but it's a method of dating the rocks when they were last exposed, or how long they've been exposed above the surface. These samples are the first ones over 3,500 kilometers of Antarctic coastline, so really special to have got those. And as this map shows, it's a huge quadrant of East Antarctic. These are the first samples we've got. But alongside that, of course, the arrival of the iceberg, what's actually happened on the seabed? So on top of taking measurements of the thickness of the sea ice to calibrate the satellite data, and hopefully now that information will be useful for people wanting to fly in. It was not possible before, so that's been provided to the Australian Antarctic Division. But on top of that, Graham and Ziggy did an amazing amount of work, much like they've done on the islands, but drilling through the ice to actually see what has happened on the seabed. So just bear in mind what you saw at the Sub-Antarctic Islands. This is the GoPro footage actually dropping down through the sea ice. Almost completely dead. The kelp forest has almost completely died, and there's now evidence that some of the deeper living organisms are now moving up from the deep sea floor, coming up into the actual bay. So if things continue, there'll be a completely different biota there now. So the team are working all this up at the moment for publication, but it's quite a marked difference to what people have observed there before. That's all within 2 years. The team were also interested in leopard seals in particular to see if they could get a handle on how their diet had changed. There's an intriguing trend in the diet of sea lions. You can look at the isotopes, the makeup of the blubber in particular, as what their diet is changing in more recent years. And that was led by Tracy Rogers, but our students as well did fantastic work with actually sound, and you can use sound to actually get a handle on what age these individuals are in the water. So let's just have a quick listen to this. You can see, listen to this on SoundCloud. Quite haunting, really. So that was Nasa and Alicia working on that. And a bit like adults or humans, the depth of your voice changes as you get older, and you can tell then as a result whether it's a younger or older individual. So Nasa and Alicia were working on some of that. But alongside that, Eric was also looking at the ocean conditions as well, and actually measuring the temperature and salinity, and alongside that, here's Eleanor with some of the volunteers looking at an ocean core we also took in the area. But then we relocated to the east. We wanted to move around and have a look at an area where the population, where the edge of the sea ice was not so far to the coast. 65 kilometers, we'd taken several groups in there. We wanted to relocate over, and we moved over. And all the satellite imagery showed a clear route, had done for several days. As I said, we were very fortunate to have the imagery coming through every day and being interpreted, and we got caught. It moved remarkably quickly. Everything was fine. You read this in the old books of how quickly things can change, and even with the best satellite technology, it still moved too quickly. And we got caught. This is the academic Shackleton there, trapped in the sea ice. We could see at first the edge of the sea ice was about 2 to 4 nautical miles away. The old timers talked about something called water sky, where you could see the open water reflecting on the underneath of the clouds. If you can see that photo just up there, the dark clouds there in the far side, that's actually water sky. So we could see that 2 to 4 nautical miles might as well be 100. There's just no way through. And it was quite remarkable seeing just what a broken surface we were surrounded by. This was not ice that had just suddenly got cold and snapped. It was actually old multi-year ice, many meters thick, that looks like it moved from the coastline by weather and moved in very quickly. And at the moment, it looks like it moved from the east and north. So this is satellite imagery before and after. We got caught on the beginning of Boxing Day, and it looks like it came out from the far east on the other side of what was the Mertz Glacier tongue and swung in very, very quickly, very quickly. But Eric was determined, much like the rest of the team, to get as much of the science out as possible. So this is Eric doing one of the movies, just showing what we were doing.
Hi, I'm Eric Van Stabeel, and I'm the oceanographer on the Australian Antarctic Expedition. We are stuck in the ice, but that doesn't limit us to doing science, of course. So even though this is New Year's Day, I am going to do some more science experiments. This is a MicroCat CTD, it's called, and it is a very expensive device that measures temperature, salinity, and depth as we throw it down. And we've almost every day since we've been stuck here, we've done a measurement like this, just to find out how much the temperature and salinity of the water around us is changing.
And when we plotted those measurements up, these are curves from two different parts of the area, central and the east, with different previous visits of salinity. And then the grey vertical bars you can see there are to the relative right. So they're relatively saline, which implies that compared to, say, 2012, which is on the far left, that actually the water is saltier and implies that Antarctic bottom water formation looks like it might have resumed. So the earlier suggestion that things had shut down, possibly a regime shift, doesn't look like it's true. And that's not something you can do remotely. You have to get in there and actually make those measurements. So just to conclude, we were inspired by Mawson, and we used a century-old funding model. But this wasn't a recreation of an old journey. It was using science. We did a research program across the Sub-Antarctic Islands, the Southern Ocean, and Cape Denison. It was a full multidisciplinary team. The idea was to try to capture as much broad change as possible and integrate it. And the key thing as well was to actually communicate that science to the public. Not just tell them what we found, but actually how we were discovering that and taking people on a journey. At the moment, the latest count is at least 20 research papers, so it looks like there's going to be a rich scientific trawl. But we wouldn't be here without a huge amount of help from the Australians, the Chinese, the French, and even the US were willing to help as well. It was a remarkable effort, incredible amount of help. But I think we also it opens up the opportunity, not just in Antarctica, but anywhere, where potentially this small science, getting the public involved to address key questions, areas where you might want to go and get a small team into an area of the world, opens up the opportunities of getting the public involved with modern technology, with funding, to actually deliver science that maybe sits outside the more traditional or runs in parallel with the big programs. And I think it's just, it's nice to remember this lovely quote from Carl Sagan. If we teach only the findings and products of science, no matter how useful and inspiring they may be, without communicating its critical method, how can the average person possibly distinguish science from pseudoscience? Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, Chris, thank you very much indeed. We've got about 20 or so minutes for questions. So who'd like to go first?
Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. I'm curious, what big questions you think are still to be addressed in Antarctica that need to be addressed through expeditions rather than remote sensing satellite technology?
Well, Antarctica, to be perfect, this area is a huge amount still to be done. So that part of East Antarctic, one of the things we still don't fully understand at the moment, for instance, is why the East Antarctic sea ice is still increasing. It's really, there's a huge number of ideas out there, and there's more information required. So given more time, I think there's a lot that we can still do in those areas. But there's huge areas of Antarctica people just have not been into yet. We just don't know what's there, what resources are there. I mean, one of the things that we're working on at the moment in a different part is a place called Patriot Hills. And if you saw, when I was growing up, Palin's pole to pole, and he flew to the South Geographic Pole of a company called Antarctic Logistics Expedition, wonderful company we use. And they've now relocated, but that's an area of blue ice. So that's an area where these katabatic winds come off the plateau, strike the downwind, and basically ablate the surface and basically exposes the ice underneath, drawing up the older ice to the surface. So rather than going along and dropping an ice core, which can cost millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, you can go along with something that you bought from B&Q or Mitre 10 and actually sample, just walk back through time towards the mountains. And that preliminary work that we've done looks like that particular part of the ice sheet goes back about 60, 70,000 years. Now, that was used as a landing strip when Michael Palin went through to the South Pole. It's no longer there used as such. But there's huge areas of these blue ice areas which could have incredibly old ice in them. No one knows. And some of those, it could be 1 million years old that's accessible, and we just don't know. So that's the nature of science and exploration. Just don't know what you're going to find. It might not be Van Old, but it might be. But the Cape Denison, when we were there, that's got blue ice welling up as well. But there was so much, it was so warm, it was almost, the water was across the surface flowing down this scarily steep surface. And we nearly got our ice core trapped because the ice was then refreezing on the barrel. We nearly got stuck. So it was just not possible to core that. But goodness only knows how old that is. So there's these remarkable archives of information there that are still just there for sampling if someone can get in.
Wasn't that Cape Denison ice used for for refreshing drinks at some point?
I believe so.
It might have been used for that. Any more questions from that? Yeah. Why don't we go to the back there, and then we'll come to you at the front.
Hi, I'm Ros Donald, and I write for a blog called Carbon Brief, and you very kindly wrote a blog for us. You emphasise how important it is to communicate the scientific method. And I'd be interested to know how important that is, particularly for climate science. And my second question is, what top tips would you have for scientists who want to communicate their science but don't know where to start?
I think full stop with science communication, it's very easy, I think, to just report the headlines. I think that's really very, and it certainly was a trap I fell into early on, where you're then vying with everyone else. And it doesn't have to just be climate change, it can be any topic. And the problem is it becomes a headline, it becomes just something that people haven't really engaged in. So I think with a sort of idea of it, this lovely quote from Carl Sagan, of being able to actually talk about how the scientific method works, so the fact it's self-correcting, you're always testing yourself. It's not a belief, it's actually, you're questioning the whole time, and that can be applied to almost anything. So I think it's terribly important to do that, and there's various different ways that you can do it, and social media is just one way, and it's a fantastic way of doing that. With those who want to get involved more, I think even starting with something like Twitter is brilliant. Google Plus is fantastic because you can do so much. There's so much different technology that's embedded with that. But certainly talk to communicators like you and just ask advice about what's trending, what's significant. It does take a bit of investment of time. Usually find half an hour to an hour each day or so, just looking at different areas. And you don't just want to generate yet more stuff on the web. You actually want to actually write something that's trying to be insightful or providing a link or something that people might have missed. So, but just give it a go, learn as you go, and it is actually incredibly good fun. And I think one thing I've learned, communicating science as well in particular, you have to ask those daft questions, ones you don't ask yourself as a scientist, the simplest ones. Surely someone's done this. And you'll go back on I've done a few books now, and the number of times I'm writing a book chapter, and you can't blind people with science. You have to actually explain what the rationale is. And then you go back and you say, right, okay, I need to explain. Surely someone's done some research on this. And then you go back and you realize that actually no one's done any research on this. And so it's actually, science communication is really quite a lovely way sometimes of actually making you a deeper thinker and actually questioning what the basic premise is. And it's remarkable sometimes when no one's done it. So it's actually, it actually works to the benefit of your science career as well.
When the science report comes out, how would one get a copy of it?
Well, in the good old days when Mawson did his reports, they took...
you got the report from last year when
Yes. They took 30 plus years and various negotiations with New South Wales government and 89 reports that fills a page. Fortunately, we now have PDFs and research papers. And we'll be publishing those on various journals. We're looking at a variety of open source as well, so people will be able to just download the papers as well alongside that. But the idea will be that alongside the science paper, which can sometimes be quite dense in the language, there'll be quite a lot actually there where we'll have an accompanying article that will explain some of the implications as well. So even if you can't download the actual research paper, you'll have an interpretation. Oh, well, what we'll have is we're updating the website, spiritofmawson.com, and there will be a page dedicated to science output, and you'll be able to go there. And we'll announce on social media as well that they'll be there. But science journals at the moment is averaging about, well, it depends on which journals you go to, so it can take several months going through peer review and publish. So, but keep an eye on the website, definitely worth it.
Hello, thank you for the talk, it was very good, thank you. I was wondering if the repeal of the carbon tax, because obviously you got a lot of help from Australian scientists, and the situation going on in Australia where the government's sort of going back on a lot of its climate sort of promises and things like that, if that would have any effect on funding of of research in the Antarctic in the future.
Just to be clear on this, this is a very important question about funding of Antarctic and climate science research in Australia, which has not been the friendliest place for this kind of research for many years, and now is becoming more and more unfriendly, given the sort of the latest government. So, what are your political thoughts on that?
I think that level of discussion has become quite common in Australia in particular, but around the world. Personally, I feel there's actually been a conflation of two things. There's been the science and there's been policy, and I think the two have somehow got combined. Sometimes in the case you shoot the messenger. As a scientist, you can report what you find. Well, I feel as a person, individual is another thing, but as a scientist, we find if you put or flood the atmosphere with 200 billion tons of carbon, we're warming a planet. And you can see it in the oceans, there's a variety of evidence for that. But that's not the policy implications. The policy implications is what government has to do, and I don't envy them. That's a huge challenge of how you deal with that. There's still details about what the implications of that might be, but managing that is going to be the next challenge. And that's something we're very fortunate. We live in a democracy, and the governments have to sort that out and deal with that, and what the electorate feels is significant. But as a scientist, all we can do is report the science, use this philosophy explaining why these observations mean these conclusions, and then that's then up to the rest of the system, decision makers, to then deal with that. And we as an electorate or individuals, if you feel strongly enough about it, you should vote accordingly and challenge people on that. But
Chris, do you have any personal thoughts on that, though? I mean, surely you can't just leave it there. You do this for a purpose, though, don't you?
Yeah,
you want people to take notice.
That's right. And it's a common theme at the moment in many Western countries. Actually, funding in science is actually decreasing. There's hard evidence that shows it hits economic growth, but putting that aside, it is something that actually is having a major impact. So science funding is decreasing. So as scientists, regardless of what topic you want to do, whether it's flavour of the month or not, reaching out to the public and saying, look, this is something we find intellectually interesting and it's important, and reaching out to the public is significant. And I think this is going to become more and more common as you actually try to deal with this funding shortfall. In a variety of different topics, there are avenues and opportunities to get people engaged. And if that means by communicating science, people can actually understand how to reach those conclusions, be it climate change or whatever, then that's great.
Thanks, Chris. That was a great talk. You seemed a lot luckier with the conditions than Mawson was. I was wondering if you had any ordeals which led you at any point to consider biting off your own finger?
No, fortunately not biting off our own finger. I mean, cannibalism didn't come close. It was one of those environments where up to that point, things had gone up. Before we got caught, it was the team had worked incredibly well. Things had worked pretty much to plan, remarkably well to plan. And then we got caught. And there were elements, I think, where all of us struggled a little bit when we were on the ship. It wasn't easy. I think we all learned a lot about one another and ourselves. But we're all still talking, and everyone got out okay. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. But no bitten fingers, anyway.
There's going to be a Hollywood film of that one day, I tell you. Yeah.
Using Mawson's finger as a marker, were any Mawson relatives and descendants now in any way involved in any of this work that you're now doing?
Actually, it's a lovely point, actually. We've been working with a variety of people. There was a lovely centenary conference in Adelaide, actually, just a few months ago on the Aurora, led by Mark Farrow, who's part of the team. And many of the descendants joined that conference and gave talks. And it's remarkable just how much information they've got. Hunter family was one of the biologists with Mawson. Jenny gave a fantastic talk on that, and they've got some wonderful material, particularly on our bird observations and the like, from Cape Denison, which isn't actually in any of the archives. So actually the families have still got some wonderful material, and they're wonderfully open about it. So we're using that material, and they're helping us with that. I guess it's our century. It's not that long ago. It's great-grandparents, basically. It wasn't that long ago, and they've got some fantastic memories of the trips. Fascinating, though, talking to some. But some talked about it a lot, and others didn't. But, of course, this is all leading right into the First World War. This is just prior. And it's heartbreaking. Several of the people who survived 1912, survived that, then died in the First World War. So, heartbreaking.
On the matter of penguins, I understand the adelies are under pressure, and that their nests can get flooded because they always go back to the same place, as you say, and the water level's rising. And I think you said that the food supply was under threat, and I wondered why that was. What's gone wrong there? Is it the krill or whatever? And why? And just as an addendum to that, how is the emperor penguin getting on?
Very good questions. To be perfectly honest, it varies enormously from one area of Antarctica to the other. So some areas are seeing actually expansion of populations, and others less so. The diet certainly seems to have been changing a little bit based on Tracy's work and others looking at the isotopic composition, and that's possibly related to changes in ocean circulation. But of course, it's also, that area still, that region is still returning and recovering from a huge amount of fishing, but still going on in parts, but with massive kills of whales in particular, that populations just never really recovered. Penguin populations seem to have seals in many areas, but so at the moment the area is very patchy, and half the problem is as well. I mean, Cape Denison. This is why Cape Denison is so important. We have observation counts from a century ago. Many of the observations haven't been done since the bases were set up in the 1950s, or even more recently, 80s onwards. So you've only got a little bit of information, and of course populations change so much as well. But certainly within Cape Denison, the population looks like it's dropped quite a bit. But I mean, I was having a fascinating conversation with some of the guys over recently, just with regards to conservation work, and because of these challenges, there's huge problems with some of the areas as you're getting ice retreat and erosion now kicking in as well in some of these areas in Antarctica. So it's a huge challenge, not just on the biological, but also even on the conservation side. And the emperor? And the emperor, likewise, the population varies enormously. Some areas are reporting drops, other areas increases, but it's hard to tell based on only a few decades of data, but I'm sure there's people in the audience who've probably got more understanding of that than I have.
Are there any final questions? Okay.
Hi, Chris. That was a really good lecture. I thoroughly enjoyed that. So one thing that's come across is the high priority putting into getting the information across in as near real time as possible. How do you address the problem doing that with withholding information so that you can get the prestigious publications put out in journals like Nature and New Science and bits like that? Because once it becomes in the public domain,
yes,
they're very often not interested in taking up the information for paper publications.
Yes, that's right. No, it's an important point actually. I mean, if you publish too much, so some unscrupulous colleague could take the data and incorporate it into theirs. There's certain ways you can deal with that, though. You only put a general trend. You don't give the numbers. There's a number of ways that you can actually manage that. I think that's. It's different in some fields compared to others. I was very fortunate a few years ago to be involved in the discovery of a new species of human, Homo floresiensis, or the hobbit, we call it, from Indonesia. And that's a whole other nightmare situation. Even a brief description of the name Homo habitus, and suddenly that's formally described, and you've lost your prestigious article. So we were all sworn to secrecy on that one. So that's probably, if I discovered a new human species, I wouldn't be blogging about that. But some areas of research where you've got some outputs, you can still, I think, communicate that without compromising the major discoveries. A lot of the time, though, when you've got these big papers where you're pulling all this information together, there's still a lot of work to go into. This is multidisciplinary research. It's very rare that just one aspect will actually result in the paper. It's usually bringing lots of different things together. So I think we're very fortunate in the earth sciences area that I think you can manage that. But you're absolutely right. It is a challenge.
I've been on quite a few expeditions where the data's been collected and it's been gathered and about to go into publication. It'll be real feeds of a new species or something like this. And just prior to it being, like I said, sent up into the ether for broadcasting, it's suddenly been pulled back. No, we can't do that.
Oh.
And then everyone's sworn to secrecy. And it's very difficult that if it was a live feed that was coming straight up, which occasionally happens, then you'd blow it because everyone's so excited on seeing this event happening that any chance of the papers being published would presumably get knocked on the head before it even gets into people's sort of realization that they've come across something that spectacular.
Yeah, well, that's always a risk, I guess, but ultimately, hopefully we haven't ruined our chances, but I'll let you know.
Okay.
Well, I think we should wind up there because it's 8:30. Actually, Chris, I'd just forgotten about the Homo floresiensis stuff that you were involved in. Because I was going to finish by saying that all these because that's a bonkers story of people stealing fossils and arguing and for years on end. And you're sort of smiling now, but I'm sure it wasn't pleasant at the time. But between that and this, I really do think that you are the Indiana Jones of modern climate science. And with that, can I ask you to put your hands together for a brilliant talk on
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.